Once upon a time, there was a game called Hard Drivin'. Then a year after that game took the world by storm, comes the long-awaited sequel to that perennial masterpiece, Hard Drivin' II, Drive Hard. Oh, come on. Come on, drive harder? Really? What's next? Hard Drivin' with a Vengeance? They should have went with that action. Hard Drivin' with a Vengeance. Oh, Jiminy Crickets.
Checkpoint.
That's just... Yeah. So yes, Hard Drivin' II, Drive Harder, released in 1992 for MS-DOS as well as Atari ST and Amiga. Those two actually came out a year or two earlier from Domark Software Limited, I believe. And this is about as much of an official sequel to Hard Drivin' as Strider Returns is a sequel to Strider. They may package it that way, but it's all just a sham, especially when Atari Games themselves put out their own arcade sequel in Race Drive-It in 1990. Anyway, Hard Drivin' II gives you 5 tracks to play around in. In addition to the original arcade track, you've got 3 others which are just slight variations of the original track, and there's also a track editor that can be used to create your 5th and final track. But unfortunately, I couldn't get it to work for some reason, and therefore I only have the 4 tracks to play with, which is more than enough for me, I suppose. So after a rather stuttery ho-hum opening title theme, you get to pick your track, you choose your shift mode between manual and automatic, toggle a couple more options, and then you play the game. The PC speaker noise, supposedly replicating engine noise, is the very epitome of an old ARMAC 21 term that wouldn't fly in the current YouTube climate, but ear violation central is a nice little euphemism that gets the point across. Fortunately, I'm not going to make you folks suffer through that noise, so instead I'm filling the void with music from Top Gear 2 on the Mega Drive, because that sounds much more pleasant. I would have gone Super Nintendo version, but let's not make it too high-tech because quite frankly, this game doesn't really deserve that kind of treatment. Much like Hard Drivin', Drive Harder charges you with completing 1 lap of a track under a given time to challenge the dreaded Phantom Photon to a one-on-one race. Each track has a simple driving route or a stunt track with loops and bridges and stuff. They're merely variations of the same concept, and thus the goal remains the same for each, only the qualifying time varies. During the qualifying lap, running out of time and failing to qualify signals an end to your game, while during the actual race, if you crash just once, you lose, which is something to bear in mind. The game lets you control your car with either a joystick, keyboard, or mouse. I did not test this with a joystick because that requires joystick calibration, and I have no patience for that shit these days, but keyboard controls just fine. Perhaps a bit stiff at times when it comes to turning, but it's more than adequate otherwise. Mouse control, on the other hand, is overly sensitive, and trying to maintain a firm grip on your vehicle can be a bit challenging. Regardless, control is not perfect, but it is somewhat manageable to varying degrees. What's not so manageable are the physics, which tend to be a bit wonky at times, particularly during the loops. More often than not, the loops are a nuisance to get through, which is sad because in other versions of Hard Drivin', I can get through the loops just fine, whereas here, I've got enough crashes from this one segment alone to recreate that whole urinating tree pwned segment that is, quite frankly, Hard Drivin's only real contribution to the world. Now apparently the original computer versions of Hard Drivin' had quite a few bugs, and Domark decided to release Hard Drivin' II as sort of a fixed version of that game along with a couple extra tracks. Well, I can't speak for those other versions, but as far as this DOS version goes, whatever happened in the playtesting portion missed a few bugs because some weird stuff that shouldn't be happening in a Hard Drivin' has happened more often than not. But even if that were not the case, Hard Drivin' II is just more Hard Drivin'. Same game you've played before with a couple extra tracks, a track editor that didn't work on my end for some reason, and also you can link up 2 PCs together and play head to head, which I'd imagine would be loads of fun or something, I don't know really. And while the audio aspect of the game predictably leaves much to be desired, the visual portion of the program is pretty solid, I think. Granted, this is 1992, we're still a short time away from what I'd consider the turning point where PC gaming steps up its game with some truly amazing stuff, and to call Hard Drivin' II a precursor to things to come would be a bit of a stretch, but on a whole, this looks the part for the most part, and the frame rate, while not entirely smooth, is actually quite stable until you start involving heavy objects, at which point it does start to chug a bit, but other than that, it looks fine, I think. Overall, Hard Drivin' II, Drive Harder on MS-DOS, well, it's merely an expanded version of Hard Drivin', and one that does a more than adequate job of replicating that arcade gameplay, save for a few bugs here and there that hampered the whole deal. It's a perfectly playable version of the game otherwise, and would have been a nice option for those needing their Hard Drivin' fix, but nowadays, this is more of a novelty than anything, as there are easier and quite frankly better means of playing Hard Drivin' out there. You're not really missing out on anything by skipping this one, but bugs aside, Hard Drivin' II is a serviceable port of a rather ambitious driver for its day. A bit of a shame they never came out with Hard Drivin' with a Vengeance. That would have been funny. Oh well.